I'm David Bogle. As Denise said, I'm head of the UCL doctoral school. We just have one institutional doctoral school for covering all of the research students. We have about 6,000 research students across all the disciplines at UCL, and I'll come back to talk about that a bit. I'm an engineer, in fact, chemical engineer, but I have had some professional experience, so I understand a bit about the links through to the profession of engineering. And in fact, I sat for many years for some years on the board of the Engineering Council, which is the regulatory body of engineering training and education in the UK. So, you know, we're here to talk a lot about professional training and professional doctorates, which is what we're celebrating today. I'm also chair of the League of European Research Universities Doctoral Studies Community. League of European Research Universities, 21 research-intensive universities across Europe. So it's UCL, Imperial, Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Leiden, Leuven, Heidelberg, Munich. I can't remember the rest. But I worked out that we had more than 12% of all doctoral candidates in Europe. So you know, I think we're really seen by governments, and particularly Brussels, as really knowing what am I trying to say? Knowing how to do it, let's say, having a lot of experience anyway, good and bad, within doctoral education in Europe and beyond. So lots of things going on behind me. So it's interesting. Okay, so as I said, we've got 6,000 research students at UCL, and most of them are PhD students. But I'd say pushing 20-odd% are professional doctoral students. I'll come back to the perspective, the landscape, professional doctorate landscape within UCL in a minute. But I wanted first to talk a bit about the doctoral strategy, because professional doctorates I see as research students, the same as all the others, and very much fitting within the institutional doctoral strategy, which is training what we say creative, critical, autonomous, intellectual risk takers. Snappy little title, but creative, we want them to be really imaginative. We want original thought in our research students. Critical, that means really rigorous in the work that people do and the work they put forward for publication and assessment. Autonomous, we're really training independent thinkers and independent people to have independent careers in research or even outside research. I'll come back to that again. And then this idea of intellectual risk-taking, the ability to, you know, we want to be taking risks. We want to be pushing the boundaries. Creativity doesn't come without risk. So I just thought I'd read to you the sort of top line of the research strategy. We aim to educate our candidates to be prepared to make significant contributions in a wide range of careers in the UK and around the world. Academic posts, research in non-academic sectors like industry, commerce, charities, the public sector, cultural organisations, and of course in education. And in non-research jobs where research skills, the rigorous attention to evidence, interpretation and creativity are of value. So the point about this is that we're not just training our research students to be academics by any means. And in fact, in the UK, less than half of the research students even do a postdoc. They go and do all sorts of things immediately after their research degrees. And we've always seen this at UCL, and certainly in my research career, I'm an engineer, maybe a bit different, but of my 35-odd PhD students, I have to say I haven't ever supervised a professional doctorate, but even of those PhD students, only 3 are academics. They've gone and done all sorts of interesting things. And that's very much true in this professional doctorate space, where we aren't by no means thinking about academic careers. We're thinking about this research and pushing the boundaries of research in the professional context. So there are 4 strands to the strategy: ensuring a high-quality research environment, preparing for a broad range of careers, I've just said that, fostering leadership grounded in excellence, encourage cross-disciplinary working and thinking, and expand training for impact. So impact is something that a professional doctorate is really looking at, really exploring, and really that the graduates are really going out there and making an impact in the world, in particular in the world of education. That's what the professional doctorate is. But I thought I might tell you that in the first line, there's a whole series of actions, and I certainly encourage you to look on the doctoral school website. You can download and have a look at the doctoral strategy. And one of the strap lines, one of the action lines says, encourage professional doctorates. I really wanted to put that in, and it was the whole strategy was approved a year or so ago by the academic committee and academic board and so on and so forth, because I wanted it to recognise the role that these professional doctorates have to say, and I'll come back to that in a bit. So it says, we will encourage the development of professional doctorate programmes where there is demonstrable need from employment sectors. UCL's professional doctorates involve a significant original research project based in professional practice. You'll recognise that, but we need to spread that word a little bit more widely around UCL, but also around Europe is one of the things I'm going on. I'll come back to that in a minute. So we have quite a lot of professional doctorates within UCL. I suspect, since the institute is new to UCL's family, since our merger, I think this is probably the oldest. But there are quite old ones, particularly in clinical psychology. So there's Dr. D. Clin Sci, the doctorate in clinical psychology. We have 3 in educational psychology, educational child psychology, educational psychology, and professional educational adolescent and child psychology, which is the one that's here in the institute. Then there's a D. Psychotherapy in child and adolescent psychoanalytic psychotherapy. So you can see the psychology community really got into this quite early. It's a very important professional training in psychology, psychotherapy, and so on. Then we have one in doctorate in clinical communication science, which is a relatively recent one. And then there are a bunch of ones that are starting to grow in the clinical areas. So there's a D-Dent in dentistry. There's one in pediatric dentistry, and doctorate in orthopedic trauma and orthopedics. And I can see one of the reasons I wanted that in the doctoral strategy is I can see the clinical ones growing, partly because there's quite a lot of money for training clinical people. They recognise the need for a research base without necessarily having the sole concentration on that the PhD brings. And so again, building it into this whole sort of professional practice domain. So I can see the clinical ones increasing. So a few years ago, we developed a set of principles that covered all the professional doctorates. In fact, it was the community itself that put these principles together, and indeed, when we merged with the Institute of Education, we looked at these principles, and indeed, the doctorate here, professional doctorate here, fitted into them very comfortably. So it's basically this taught component. There's a sort of advanced professional portfolio where people are really acting in the professional space, but really pushing those boundaries to try some new ideas out and producing a portfolio. And then this major research project that is such a fundamental part of any research qualification. So it's very much anchored in professional practice, the research project in all these professional doctorates, tackling important fundamental problems, and that you'll sort of recognise that. But I've always thought there's quite a challenge for these projects, these research projects based entirely in professional practice, because what is quite difficult is if you make an intervention, it's quite difficult to have a control on which to compare those interventions against. And that's, if you see it in a sort of scientific basis, a hypothesis, you make an experiment and then you compare it against the controls where there wasn't an experiment. And that's quite difficult to do in the professional context where you don't have control over all the variables. So that adds an extra challenge here. And some people say, oh, but doesn't that make it impossible? Well, it's got to be done, doesn't it? We have to be doing these research within this professional context, because that's where so many of those challenges come from, and that's why, what I see from the EdD, that's the way you look at these things. A lot of your research projects are really based in practice and really doing things and seeing what's going on. Obviously, the thesis is 40 to 50,000 words, whereas a PhD is typically 100, so it doesn't go into the same. It's not so much, it doesn't go into the same depth. There isn't often so much evidence necessarily in there, but it's still a major research project, which is why I will always defend it's a doctoral level qualification. I have to be honest with you, when I first became head of this about 10 years ago, I was, what are these things? Are they the same? What are these professional doctorates? Are they the same sort of level? And the more I looked at, the more I thought, absolutely, this is doctoral level research. It's just different. It's not the same as a PhD. It's a doctoral level qualification with different things being developed within that. And I will really defend that. I don't need to tell you, there's some suspicion around, certainly around Europe. A lot of European countries are a bit, what are these things, and so on and so forth. But I think that's beginning to change, and certainly I've been part of telling them all that. So just to mention about the European context, LIRU, this League of European Research Universities, we produced a number of reports. What do we see as a research degree going forward? And the first one was called Training Talented Researchers for Society, Doctoral Education Beyond 2010. So that was I was a bit worried that we wouldn't be able to get a common view across all the European, certainly mostly it's Western Europe, but not entirely across all these major research universities. But actually, we all had the same goals in mind. It actually is all about the candidate. We're training talented researchers for society for a broad range of careers. And the differences between us are all in the detail, how we do it, how we examine, what sort of supervisory models, what sort of structures are. These are all second order effects. The basic idea is the same. So we very much put up this idea that it's training a candidate. These thesis is evidence, and the thesis is not the main point of a doctorate. It's actually the person that's the main. And it's amazing how many people still don't quite get that. But there were, so we also wanted to say, interdisciplinary challenges are very important. All doctorates are sort of pushing at the edge of disciplines always. International is very important, and I'm sure that's true here. And intersectoral, so that's working with the private sector, with the public sector, working charities and so on, so working well beyond the space of universities. And of course that's what we're very much about here. Then we had, a few years later, I said to everybody, right, well that's the way we see it. We have to, proof of the pudding has to be in the practice, doesn't it? And so we produced a report that's called Good Practice in Doctoral Education, which was basically all the things that our institutions were proud of. To show that we were really delivering on this vision. And then just this year we had another report called Maintaining a Quality Culture. How do you make sure that that's a consistent quality culture around? But subsequent to our first report, the European Commission put out some innovative doctoral training principles. And perhaps surprise, maybe not, it came out with interdisciplinary, international, intersectoral, right at the heart of their seven training principles. And indeed, I think it's fair to say they were very strongly influenced by this LIRU document, which was quite pleasing for us, I think. But they recently did a review of these innovative doctoral training principles, and the review that they did show that the area that was weakest was the intersectoral. Across Europe, the interactions with non-academic sectors was recognized by all actors to be not good enough. And yet here we have in this doctoral program very much strong interaction with non-academic players, with the schools and the educational establishments and organisations that you're involved in beyond universities. So I think that's why I think there is across here and across Europe a greater role for professional doctorates, because it is a way of getting that interaction with non-academic players and really helping us all to look at what are the key research challenges that are in the professional world, be it education or psychotherapy or engineering for that matter, and medicine. So I think there's a greater role for these professional doctors where research is rigorous, held to international standards, but still anchored in professional practice, which is what I see here in this activity, in this professional doctorate program that you're doing here, this EdD. So keep up the great work, keep up the research being the research component, make sure that that research component is strong and really rigorous, and remember that we're trying to produce these creative, critical, autonomous intellectual risk takers who are really going to take it back into the professional practice and really make a difference and make an impact with the research that they do. So, thank you very much for listening, and I wish you another successful, not 20 years, 100 years.